Hello again, everyone. Jeff Pirishad here with another video, but it's not a bowling ball review video today. Today, I want to get into a little discussion about a post I made on Facebook and Twitter about a month ago, because it seems to be becoming relevant again, and it was a little controversial, got a lot of replies, and I just want to kind of get into the discussion. So what I posted was that I think it's time for the PBA Tour to ban urethane balls. And I know that kind of seems a little weird, but I had 5 major reasons for that. I just wanted to get into my explanations and my reasoning behind what I was thinking. Now, keep in mind, this only applies to the PBA Tour, the national tour, so not even regionals. It doesn't apply to leagues, it doesn't apply to local tournaments. It wouldn't even apply to USBC tournaments like the US Open and the Masters, which were just contested this week and the week before as of when I'm filming this video. Although the USBC could follow suit for those 2 tournaments only if they wanted to, if they felt it was in the best interest of the competitive integrity of the tournament. So anyway, here are the 5 reasons that I came up with why I think the PBA Tour should ban urethane. So my first reason was it's just boring. It feels like every show, and keep in mind, these reasons that I'm giving are from a fan's point of view, not from a competitive bowler's point of view. If you're watching this and you bowl out on tour, I'm not looking at this the way you look at this. In fact, as a competitive bowler, I love urethane having the option of being able to throw it, because as a bowler, you want options. This is just as a fan, a person sitting on their couch watching the tour on TV, the stepladder finals from home. That's all this is about. It's boring. It seems like every show, it's just a bunch of dull urethane balls going between the first and second arrow over and over and over and over and over. And it's repetitive. It's too much. What's the point of putting out all these different patterns and putting out all this colored oil? The oil patterns, when they put the colored oil, when they're used by the reactive balls, you can see how worn down. Tom Clark, the commissioner of the PBA, has actually posted pictures on Twitter. Here's the before and here's the after of what these balls are doing to the patterns. But if you watch the show with the urethane going down the lane, they don't change. They look the same in the beginning as they do in the end. So what's even the point of the colored oil? The colored oil is to help the viewers at home who don't really know, try to get a good feeling of what the lanes do and why bowling is a difficult sport, because there's this invisible content on the lane, and it makes the sport more difficult because you can't see what the conditions are like, and it changes repeatedly throughout the course of bowling. But it's the same. 4 games of stepladder on TV, everybody's using urethane. It doesn't change. It's just the same shots over and over and over. And yes, I know bowlers on tour are supposed to be able to repeat shots. That's not the point. The point is you want to see some differences. You want to see some bowlers with different styles do some different things. But you don't see that with everybody just piping urethane up 8. It's just repetitive, it's boring, it's a snooze fest, it's just Z, period. You could just go to sleep and wake up and they're doing still the same thing. So that's reason number 1. So reason 2, I call risk versus reward, and that comes in 2 different components. The first component is the balls themselves. Urethane and reactive balls are very different in that the urethane rolls earlier, it's smoother, it's much more predictable, you know what it's going to do. They're much more low risk than the reactive balls, which come off the end of the pattern with a lot of angle, a lot of power, and if you miss by a little bit on a difficult pattern, it's going to go somewhere you might not know, and you don't know what it's going to do. And on the highest levels, on the PBA Tour level, it makes it very difficult to use it because those patterns are so hard that you can't risk it. But the problem is, it's not just a matter of risk, it's a matter of reward. if something has a high risk, it needs to have a high reward. If something is low risk, it needs to have low reward. Because why would you ever use the high risk option if the low risk option gives you the same reward or better? I mean, that's just natural thinking. So, but the problem is the urethane balls, they don't have the low reward. They may have used to, but that was back in 1992 when reactive balls first came out. The reactive balls were so much more powerful than the urethane balls that they were high reward compared to urethane balls, which were low reward. You can watch some of the early shows that you can see that. I mean, watch it was the 1992 AC Delco Classic, where I think the Excalibur was on TV the first time, I think. And Mark McDowell was throwing it, and he was playing, he's facing Marshall Holman. And you watch what McDowell's ball is doing. It's just railing off like the 3 and the 4 board and sending atomic messengers. And Marshall Holman is barely getting his ball to hook and leaving flat 10s, and they're hooking early and 3-6 10s. It's not even close. But the reward now for using urethane isn't even lower than reactive. It's higher because A, the urethane balls are a lot more powerful than they were back in the mid 90s and the late 80s. And 2, bowlers are just a lot better with creating leverage, and there's so much more power on tour. And the patterns kind of set up for it because, well, there are patterns. There were patterns back then. Now, I mean, there were lane conditions, but there were no patterns, and lane maintenance is so much more of an art form than it was back then. And back ends are so much fresher and cleaner. So the stripping fluid they're putting in the lane machine is getting more of the oil off the lane. It's cleaning better. So the urethane balls, they're coming off the end of the pattern with as much power as reactive balls. But they're smoother and they're more predictable, but they hit just as hard in a lot of cases. So you're getting the high reward without the high risk. The second component is the nature of patterns themselves. Patterns like cheetah or wolf, which are very short and were designed to have bowlers throw the ball out to the 1 board or the 2 board and ride that edge where you didn't want it to fall in the gutter, but if you missed the board in and hit like the 3 board, it would go through the face. And the patterns were a high risk, high reward. You'd throw the ball to the edge and to the first board, and you'd be rewarded. But there was a risk involved because it might go in the gutter. But when you're using urethane, you're eliminating a lot of that risk because you're able to play more direct, keep your ball on line, and it's a lot easier to keep the ball from going in the gutter because you're not having this steep angle going out to the gutter as you would be with a reactive ball. So you don't run the risk as often of the ball dropping in the gutter. Like, sure, if you miss right, by a ton, it's going to go in the gutter, of course. But because your launch angle is so much straighter and up the lane, more parallel to the gutter, even a miss will be more likely to stay on the lane. Also, when you get flat patterns or patterns with very sharp back ends, you have to be much more precise in where you get the ball to hook off the end of the pattern. But with urethane balls, because they're smoother and they're a lot more predictable, that risk factor of where the ball is coming off the end of the pattern isn't as dangerous. If you miss by a little bit, instead of going through the face and leaving a Greek church or a big 4, you might leave a 4-pin or maybe a 3-pin. If it's really bad, you leave a 3, 6, 9, 10, which sucks, but at least it's sort of makeable on tour patterns. Whereas you leave the big 4 or a 7-10 or something like that, and it's just a guaranteed open. So the risk just doesn't match the reward when it comes to urethane anymore. They used to. Reactive used to be high risk, high reward, and urethane used to be low risk, low reward. But that's just not the case anymore. And for that reason, it's just too much of an advantage to be using urethane instead of reactive. So reason 3, And I'm going to preface this by saying I know a lot of the touring pros personally. I grew up with a lot of them, like Bill O'Neill, and this isn't anything personal, but I like watching pros struggle on television. And I know it's not a popular stance with the PBA, because the PBA thinks it's, high scores are better for viewership and getting more people to watch if bowlers are throwing 11 baggers or 10 baggers or have a chance to shoot 300 instead of them bowling 190 on a grind. This doesn't, I get that, I understand it. I'm not necessarily agreeing or disagreeing with it. Me personally, I like watching pros struggle. Not just because it makes me feel better, but because these are supposed to be the best athletes that we have in our sport. And the reason they're the best athletes is because when they're tested by the conditions or by the lanes changing or for whatever reason, they find ways to succeed. Whereas normal bowlers like us don't. They're the best. And the reason they're the best is because when they struggle, they can do so many more different things to succeed. And I want to see those things. I want to see the different hand positions. I want to see coming around the ball a lot more, going up the back of it more, or changing balls, moving a zone or 3 zones left, changing speeds. With urethane balls, you really don't have to do that much because it takes the sport back to where it was in the 80s, and where instead of moving 10 boards left, you're moving a board left, maybe 2. You're changing speeds differently. You don't have to force the ball through the fronts in the same way. It's just a different adjustment series. If the adjustments, what's the adjustment? The transition, because urethane carries the oil down, because the oil doesn't get absorbed into the ball while it's rolling down the lane. It stays on the cover, and because most urethane balls don't flare a whole lot, that part of the ball is going to keep touching the lane in the back end, so there's a little carry down, and you have to adjust for a little bit of carry down. But reactive balls, the lanes just explode. We've all seen the TV shows where Belmo is lofting it over 14 gutter caps, and the Pete Weber in the Who Do You Think You Are, I Am show, he was throwing like 5th arrow or 4th arrow or something like that, using a ball that was getting through the front, but it was designed to straighten out in the back. And so many of these technical different things that the pros do, urethane just takes that all out of play. We don't have to see it anymore. And it's, as a fan, I don't want to say as a fan, because there's kind of different levels of fans. There's casual, maybe league bowlers who don't understand it, or maybe they're not even league bowlers, maybe they're just tuning in. But then there's higher skill tournament level bowlers, maybe they're not touring pros, but they kind of understand the game a little better, and they want to see these things because, one, it's fun, and 2, they can learn something by watching the pros. But there's really not a whole lot to be learned when everybody's just throwing the ball up the second arrow. It takes a lot of the educational factor out of play when it's the same thing on TV over and over. So that's reason number 3. So reason 4 is, ever since I was a kid watching the Pro Tour on TV, I loved tuning in to see what new ball the pros were throwing. There were, how many companies, back then there was Ebonite and Brunswick and Track and Storm and all the companies, and they would all come out with their new stuff, and there wasn't really like the staffer culture back then, and there wasn't Facebook for sure in the 80s and 90s, so you never really got to see the new bowling balls until they were released. But the pros on TV, sometimes they would be throwing them a week or 2 or 3 before they were released, and no matter what lane condition was out, you can bet that they were throwing that new ball. because that's how that was their marketing back then. There wasn't Facebook, there wasn't YouTube, and it was fun seeing, oh, hey, there's a new CUDA coming out, or there's a new Rhino Pro, or whatever it was back then. Hey, there's a green Pro Ball. What does that say? It's a Synergy. I mean, you don't get that now with urethane, because they're all throwing, no matter what the pattern is, everybody's throwing urethane. A couple of exceptions, of course, here and there. But you don't get to see the new stuff that companies are coming out with anymore. And I mean, even me, I'm on staff with MOTIV, but I still watch all the YouTube videos, almost every ball that comes out. I just like watching them go down the lane, see what they do. Not just because, as a fan, but because I like to compare. And so that way I see if, when I'm bowling a tournament, somebody else who's throwing, other companies' ball is doing a certain thing on the lane, I know what kind of ball that is, so maybe I can make an adjustment for that also. But that's the competitive side of me. The fan part of me just wants to see, the new balls, and we don't get to see that anymore. And how do you think these bowling ball companies feel? I mean, they're paying $10,000 or more to the PBA for product registration, so that the company's stuff is able to be thrown and allowed to be thrown in the PBA. And part of that reason is so that they can have their stuff thrown on television, but it's never thrown on television. I mean, they do that in the bag thing, which they kind of have to do now, which lists like the 5 pieces of equipment that they have, ready. I mean, they've got 25 bowling balls sitting there, but, they list, their 5 most important balls, or their 4 most important, or the newest balls, and then the one they're throwing, which is, the urethane ball with the 3.0 hook rating, as opposed to all the, the 10.0s and 9.0 hook monsters. They never get thrown, or they do rarely. But how do you think companies feel where they can't have their newest stuff ever seen on TV? Because, I mean, now the pros, they're just going to use whatever gives them the best chance to win. And the urethane gives them the best chance to win. So, I mean, it's a negative for the companies. It's a negative for fans, because they don't get to actually see all this new stuff. And I think that takes away from a lot of the marketing and commercial side of the sport, in addition to just the view from a fan. So the 5th reason is a little different. I think that the prevalence of urethane as being the solution for everything is hurting the development side of the game. And what I mean is, back in 10, 20, 30 years ago, if you look at bowlers who were coming up back then, like Chris Barnes and Norm Duke, these technicians, the bowlers that succeed because of all the different things they know and the different things they can do, they are being pushed aside for the power game. But it's not just the wheel the lane and strike more. It's bowlers with a lot more power are able to get away with playing straighter, because they can use urethane so much more often to negate the bad effects of them having a power game where they might not be necessarily as accurate. Whereas a bowler like Chris Barnes or Norm Duke, who are so good at doing all these different technical things and making the right adjustments, their success is different. And you can see that, I mean, in the Masters this week, I mean, Chris Barnes did great. He advanced into really, really far in the winner's bracket. But, I mean, he was throwing a reactive ball, I think. But if you look at the show, it was just 5 urethane balls. So there's only so far that you can get, and bowlers see what makes the show. And when kids are watching, they see urethane. So they're going to now think that the solution isn't changing speeds or changing hand positions or even adjusting as much. They're going to more often think that on difficult lane conditions, the solution is just take out a urethane ball. And I think it hurts their development, and it hurts the new generation of bowlers because they're all going to be trained to look at urethane as the one-size-fits-all solution no matter what the problem is. Sure, there's some younger players that are more in the mold of Chris Barnes and Norm Duke. Francois Lavoie is probably the most notable of those. But if you look at the total picture of all of the new young players who are coming out on the tour, I think Francois is the exception rather than the rule. Most of these players are just high rev rate power guys. And it's sad for bowling as a technical sport, because I think we run the risk of training our youth bowlers in the wrong ways now. I don't want to, you know what? I don't want to say in the wrong ways because I'm not saying urethane is wrong. I just feel like they're not going to have all of the tools in their toolbox anymore. Maybe when they go to apply for a college bowling team, or if they ever bowl like junior gold, and they need to do different things. Maybe after they get out of college, they want to join the PBA and bowl on tour. They're not going to have the skill set, a complete skill set, I should say, because they're too used to just urethane is the solution. And I think that sets a bad example for what we want the next generation of youth bowlers to know and be able to do. I think we run the risk of creating an entire generation of bowlers who don't know how to do too many different things. And it's kind of strange because, I mean, this whole discussion is kind of strange because when reactive balls came out, what was everybody saying? Ban reactive balls. Go back to urethane. Reactive balls are, they're too strong and they're giving people power who shouldn't have power. But I think that goes back to the risk versus reward argument and the discussion of lane patterns. Because when reactive balls came out, there were no real patterns. So reactive balls were just being used on the same stuff that urethane balls were being used on. And they were more often than not just better because they were more powerful and you could just stand left further and open up the lane more. But that's different than it is now. Now we have all these patterns that are very specific and you have to do this and stand here and get this angle. And the only time players are really using the reactive balls for the most part is when they feel like it's easier. Because why wouldn't they? I mean, it's easier. I mean, this is how they make their living. They want to do what gives them the best chance to win, and I don't blame them. But it's different now because the urethane balls are actually easier, and there's no loss of power, very minimal loss of power, because the urethane balls strike so hard. Take Jacob Buttriff, for example. I mean, he makes urethane balls hit us harder than most people make reactive balls hit. A lot of it's because of his rev rate and what he's able to do with these balls. But because of that, he's not running into these situations as much where the urethane just doesn't work. And I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, we all know Jacob is a phenomenal bowler. I mean, he shot 300 on TV with a reactive ball last summer, I believe. So, I mean, we know he knows how to bowl with reactive. That's not the point. The point is that it's just a different way of looking at the game, whereas back then, when your reactive came out, reactive balls were just better almost all of the time because the patterns weren't as specific to punish reactive balls. These days, patterns punish reactive balls that the tour puts out. The fresh pattern, when the pattern is fresh, that first game, the back ends are so sharp, and the oil pattern has enough volume where it makes the reactive balls just push right through, save a lot of energy, and then just do who the heck knows what on the back end. So urethane is the solution. But that wasn't the case when reactive balls first came out, and everybody was saying ban reactive, and that's why. Because reactive balls were the solution back then, because the patterns didn't punish reactive balls, they rewarded reactive balls. So it's just different. The game has evolved to the point where it's reversed the two types of equipment, whereas now on tougher patterns, the urethane is just easier, and it's the solution so much of the time. So that's reason 5. So let me know what you guys think. If you have any comments or questions, or you just want to make fun of me because I'm an idiot, feel free to drop it in the comments. Go ahead. I know this isn't going to be the most popular video, but I know there's a lot of people out there that share the sentiment. And again, this is just from a fan's point of view, watching on your TVs at home the PBA tour, or maybe you're watching on Flow Bowling or Bowl TV, which, by the way, if you don't have a Flow Bowling subscription, get one. It's well worth it. And being able to see what these bowlers do during the course of a block is, I mean, it's part of the great thing about watching Flow Bowling. But it now takes away from Flow Bowling because people are just doing the same thing every game with the same ball, 70-80% of the field. So it even devalues the Flow Bowling subscriptions, sadly, because, I mean, you see one game and, well, you see the whole block. And you don't see that when reactive balls are in play. When reactive balls are in play, the lanes explode, people are moving, they start off at the third hour, they end up lofting it over the gutter. And because of that, the left side, the heads dry up, and now the lefties have to do different things, and this big chain reaction starts. And that's part of the great thing about watching Flow Bowling during the entire course of qualifying or match play. And you, I think, are just being robbed if urethane balls continue to be so prevalent, because there's so much more to the game than just throwing urethane up 10. And I think that as fans, we deserve to see all those things. So feel free to leave me a comment below. You can respond on Twitter. You follow me, hit me up at JeffP300. If you want to leave me a comment there, you can do that too. And if you like this video and you want to see some more of my videos, please subscribe. It's free. Just hit that button and give me a thumbs up to show you support the channel. I appreciate it. And until next time, we'll probably get into some more of the traditional bowling ball review videos. But for now, this is just something that I want to get off my chest and see what you guys think. So let me know. Thanks and have a great day.